So that's enough from me. I'll let them tell you more about themselves.
Who goes first?
You go first.
So my turn?
Go ahead.
All right, good afternoon, folks. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. As mentioned, I am the Associate Professor of Nonprofit Management and Community Organizations in the Department of Family, Youth, and Community Sciences. As all the faculty, university faculty, we are required to contribute in 3 areas. First is teaching, which is transfer of knowledge, and second is research, creation of knowledge, creation of new knowledge or expanding existing knowledge, and the third is service. So this is what we call the university's mission, and I teach nonprofit management. Specifically, I teach a graduate course on fundraising, how to raise money for nonprofit organizations, which is very relevant to what you guys are doing. I also teach a course on how to put together a nonprofit and sustain a nonprofit systematically. I teach an undergrad course also on fundraising, and I've taught in the past several other courses relating to nonprofits, including how to develop programs, effective programs, and how to evaluate the programs, and also risk management in nonprofits and so on and so forth. So that's the teaching side of it. On the research side, I have done a lot of work, projects on improving the capacities of nonprofits, not only in this country, but around the world, identifying what are the barriers for successful nonprofit projects, programs, and designing recommendations and designing programs to improve their capacity. Also, I've done research about impacts of nonprofit. Oftentimes, we fail to notice the impacts and presence of nonprofit. I've done research on that as well in terms of, in terms of products, publications, manuals, academic journals, book chapters, and so on and so forth. And the third, which is also equally important for me, is the service. We are required to serve the community, my community being nonprofits, especially nonprofit leaders. As Rebecca mentioned, I've served on dozens of nonprofit boards in the past. Currently, I serve on 3 nonprofits here in Florida in the US, and 2 international nonprofits. I can talk a little bit about that. And more importantly, I have trained nonprofits around the world. I've trained about 3,000 plus nonprofits in 9 countries across the world and continue to do so. So all these 3 are very important for me as a professor because they feed into one another. When I learn about nonprofits, how they operate in different parts of the world, I bring that into my classroom. And that helps me in doing the research. So they're very intertwined in helping me grow professionally and also and in my teaching, research, as well as service areas as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so, well, thanks for having me. So I'm a development economist in the Food and Resource Economics Department, as you said, and my research is in international development, but really particularly on issues of migration, employment, and gender issues. I also teach 2 classes at UF. I teach International Humanitarian Assistance and then Comparative World Agriculture. They are both classes in our International Development and Humanitarian Assistance minor as well, which may be interesting to several of you. So in terms of my research, one of the bigger projects that I'm working on these days is on seasonal migration in Bangladesh. So in particular, and this happens in many developing countries, during the lean season, like between planting and harvest, when there aren't that many jobs, men migrate for months at a time to urban areas. So we were interested in like the main barriers keeping even more people from migrating, given that there are no jobs during that time, and seeing whether offering subsidies for people to migrate would translate into even more people taking advantage of this opportunity or not. And my particular angle is on gender. So here I was really interested in learning on whether this pattern of migration where, you know, mostly men migrate for months at a time, whether this has an effect on gender and social norms, particularly in a relatively traditional country where women tend to not go outside by themselves and where they tend not to work from outside the home either. And this research was actually funded by GiveWell, which, as I understand, you guys also use their top charities indicator for your own initiative. And another project that I'm working on is on access to childcare, and in particular, the effect that access to childcare might have on household living conditions. So whether we see differences like households, whether they have access to childcare or not, whether that ends up reflecting into conditions at home. So do they have better durable goods, better supplies at home, et cetera, which can have implications for child health and development as well. So, well, thanks so much for having me here today. It's exciting to see so many young people interested in what an evidence-based charity giving means and what the data actually says for people who want to do good in the world, but are looking for more information on how does one do good and which is the best way to do good, essentially. So thank you.
And thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate it. So our first question is going to Dr. Kumaran. Dr. Kumaran, you have trained many NGOs to improve their organizational capacity. What, in your opinion, makes an organization effective?
In terms of organizational capacity building, in addition to effectiveness, I also like to introduce what we call efficiency. They go hand in hand. Effectiveness is a level of achievement of the goal. I mean, the level to which an organization, in this case, nonprofit, achieves its goals in terms of client satisfaction, in terms of addressing the issues of the clients. And efficiency is all about doing the same thing with limited resources. There is no infinite resources in any, especially in the nonprofit world. There is always need for resources. So a nonprofit needs to balance both effectiveness and efficiency within the capacity building framework. I use what I call 4 concentric circles when it comes to both this balancing this efficiency and effectiveness, which means the success of a nonprofit or a failure of a nonprofit if they don't do proper work on these things. First of all, one commonality is all nonprofits, all NGOs around the world have a service motivation. There is passion involved, but passion alone is not going to take the organization for too long. Sustaining the programs and especially expanding the programs. So these two need to be balanced, both effectiveness and efficiency. So these 4 concentric circles that I'm talking about, within the center of the first circle, the center circle, which is a very core, is what we call the mission. That's the purpose of the organization. All nonprofits, NGOs have specific purpose, specific clientele, and so on and so forth. So at the center, the first circle is the mission of the organization, the very purpose. The second circle is program development. A nonprofit needs to understand the need of the client and develop specific programs and services to address those needs, address those issues faced by clients. So that's at the second level. Effectiveness is highly connected with good program planning and evaluating the programs, right? So planning and evaluation are very, very important. They go in the second circle. If a nonprofit has good mission, good programs, the third circle comes into play, which is goodwill. People notice, right? People who believe in a cause notice about this organization and begin to help in terms of donation, in terms of volunteering. All those come into the third circle. So nonprofits definitely need goodwill to exist and thrive because most nonprofits are heavily dependent upon donations, giving, and also volunteering, right? And then the fourth circle, so a good mission, good program planning and evaluation, and all these things result in goodwill. And the fourth circle is what I focus my profession on. The fourth circle is what we call strategic management, right? So strategic management is all about using the limited resources to the maximum level and take the organization to the next level to grow and so on and so forth. If you look at any nonprofit that has grown consistently in the last 10, 20, 15 years, including your very own organization, there were strategic planning involved. There are strategic decisions made at any given point to take the organization, not just to sustain the program, but to expand the scope, expand the clients. I read somewhere, I mean, it started with few chapters, now you are expanding. So somebody made strategic decision. So in terms of effectiveness, yes, the strategic management part, but efficiency also goes balanced with this. A good nonprofit operates at an optimal level when it balances both effectiveness and efficiency.
And also, Dr. Kumaran, as a follow-up to that question, and how have your experiences like working with these nonprofits impacted your views on effective altruism and making sure that we're giving money to the right places?
I mean, personally, one of the blessings of my job, what I do is, like I said, I've trained 3,000. I had the pleasure and honor of meeting these thousands of NGO leaders in different parts of the world, in the rural, remote areas of Nepal, in Belize, a project I'm doing right now, India, and not only, this country, different parts of the US as well. The absolute joy of meeting them is when I look them in the eyes, I see that the true altruism, the selflessness, the passion comes through. They care about people. That is very powerful, right? So in terms of the other aspects of altruism, yes, they are passionate, but they need to convert that passion into action, addressing some issues that the organization starts with, like I said, the mission, which is at the core of the organization. And when that is done well, it reverberates. People notice, when people who run the organization, who founded the NGOs, have the true spirit of giving, selflessness, right? Not just in terms of money per se, but in terms of the truly putting the heart where it should. And then when they work towards that, I've seen magic happen, right? I've seen magic happen. People notice, people connect with the organization because we all believe in certain causes, right? That's a part of humanity. By nature, we care about something, not everything, but some issues, some cause, environmental cause and social issues and so on and so forth. So if people who found the organization and eventually who govern the organization, the board of directors and eventually the employees, if they do their work with such passion, altruism transcends across the board in terms of people giving, people volunteering, like you folks, as Professor Reimão mentioned earlier, it is really heartening for us to see young people like you taking care of this particular issue, right? So you're very busy with academic, your courses and so on and so forth, your social activities, but in spite of that, you are trying to help, in this case, a huge issue that is that continues to exist in this world, global poverty and so on and so forth. So I've been talking, but I hope I address address the gist of the questions that you raised, and what I see, how I see altruism changing, and it also keeps me in track. I'm going the right direction. But it's absolutely powerful to see people across the world who believe in certain causes and do whatever it takes to address those issues.
Thank you.
Dr. Reimão, this one is for you. So we've noticed that your work includes migration and gender. What are some practices we can take to make sure we are giving charity in an intersectional way and not in a way that only benefits a certain subset of people?
Okay. Well, I think some issues are universal, right? I think if we think of like protecting children from, say, malaria or some sort of parasite, right? It doesn't really matter if they're boys or girls, right? Like both are vulnerable to these ailments. They would both benefit from treatment. So at face value, it seems like it's universal, right? But at the same time, now from my experience in development, the more you're in the field, the more you're in these projects, you realize that it's actually worth thinking also of the context where perhaps one gender would actually end up being more vulnerable than the other, even if at face value you're like, well, boys and girls are equally vulnerable to malaria, right? You can think about, so one of the most common and cheapest ways to prevent malaria is bed nets, right? Is using bed nets above your bed to protect your bed, essentially, usually with insecticide on it. But if a household doesn't have money to have bed nets for everyone, and or they just simply don't have enough bed nets, for example, then you have to think about who in the household will get the bed net. Well, the person who needs to go to work and earn money for the family, or those who work at home, or the kids. Often you'll choose a person who needs to go to work. So even something that at face value seems like you know, gender doesn't really matter. It might in the end of the day where you're thinking, or like, you know, age doesn't really matter. When a household is very constrained in resources, it might, you know, it might be that then you are prioritizing men or people who actually can contribute financially to the household compared to everyone else if you simply just don't have enough of a simple resource like that. Or similarly, when we think about deworming, which is another program that's pretty straightforward, you think, well, you know, pills work just as well for boys and girls, and they are just as vulnerable to the parasites, right? But you have to think also the deworming programs are frequently done at schools. Do kids of both sexes actually have similar access to school? Are girls more likely to not be enrolled in school and therefore just not get this? Are boys, older boys, more likely to drop out earlier from school in this context? And then also, again, not have access to it. So there's nothing inherently problematic, and it's actually quite good to give bed nets or to think about deworming. And in fact, like, these programs are excellent. But it's really worth thinking about the distribution systems as well and who benefits, and are these NGOs or whatever initiative, sometimes it's done by a government, are they actually taking these parts into account as well, right? And if you think in bed nets, for bed nets specifically, I would argue that distributing more of them actually does address gender issues, right? Because now if you distribute more bed nets so that the household has enough for every bed or enough for every mattress in the household, even though you're saying like bed net is something neutral, like gender neutral, when it comes to the experience in the household, it actually might be erasing differences or addressing differences between gender, right? Now that the household doesn't have to choose who's going to get the bed net or who's going to get the safer bed, right? It's like you're no longer making these difficult decisions, which very frequently fall across gender lines.
Thank you. And like on the whole thing with like, sorry, bed nets, and it reminds you of GiveWell, Dr. Reimão, you said you're like really familiar with GiveWell because they have funded a project you've worked on. Can you tell us about that project?
Yeah, sure. So before I came to UF, I was actually a postdoctoral fellow at Yale and with Evidence Action, which if you've seen the top charities, you're going to see some from Evidence Action. The deworming program is an Evidence Action program. So they have one of the top charities. They have another one that's also the Dispensers for Safe Water. But anyway, for this fellowship, I was actually hired to work on the seasonal migration project that I mentioned, right? So the issue was that some researchers from several universities, one of them at Yale, which is why I ended up there, had done this initial project that showed that subsidizing migration had huge effects on the subsidizing temporary migration had huge effects on migration, but then also positive effects on household income, on consumption, and this seems really promising. And so GiveWell was interested in funding additional tests of the same intervention to see if this little intervention, which was like 6,000 households, could become like a real program, you know, actually affecting hundreds of thousands of households, that it would be implemented not only in Bangladesh, but also in other parts of the world. So they wanted to know basically like, all right, so you guys did this small little program and it had promising results. Are we sure about these results? And do they also hold if we make it a lot larger and help and give these subsidies to a lot more people? Like, is this still going to work? So, and I think that's remarkable, like that an organization that's focused on charity giving was willing to invest on that. So not just saying like, oh, that seems like a nice idea to subsidize people, let's just do more of it. But instead they said like, well, let's look into the evidence. Let's see whether this is something that really could work, and that it could work at scale, right? Maybe it works very well for, 6,000 people, but doesn't really work once we start giving this to 200,000 people, right? So that's what they were interested in doing. And they put money into this, which is also remarkable, right? It wasn't just like, prove to me that your idea works and then I'll think about it, right? It was really like, well, we want to invest on the most effective thing. So I'm willing to invest to find out if this is effective. So here's money to see if this works. Is the impact really that great? And is it also great compared to other charities that we would give instead? So that's part of it too, right? It's not just, is there impact and does this work? Does this work relative to these other things that we also know work very well? So basically my research was in testing the scaled up version of this intervention that had been studied as a small pilot.
Thank you so much for that. So yeah, as we were saying earlier, we're partners with GiveWell. GiveWell also funds us. We wouldn't exist without them. So it's really great to see how they invest in all these different organizations to try all these different interventions using all this data and research. So thank you for that. So another question, this is for the both of you. Often the most effective charities or organizations don't really reach mainstream audiences. So I had never heard of GiveWell or its charities before getting involved with One for the World. Why do you think that is, and what do you think we can do to change that?
I go first? All right. In the domain of nonprofit organizational management capacity building, nonprofits need to learn a lot from the their for-profit counterpart, businesses, right? A nonprofit doesn't mean go broke. Nonprofits need to bring more money than they spend in order to improve. Only difference is the so-called excess funds or expenditure goes into expand the organization. So a lot of management practices nonprofits need to learn from for-profit sector. It is happening, but it's slowly, it takes a while for nonprofits to understand that. The key part of your question is marketing, right? Many nonprofits still think it is slimy to market what they do, right? There's nothing slimy about marketing. And if you look at the for-profit world, that's the mighty marketing machinery of corporate sector sells us things that we need, sells us things we don't need, sells us things that we will never need. That's what this Black Friday and all these things are about. And the nonprofit sector, it is improving slowly and steadily, but nonprofit sector needs to go a long way in marketing what they do. The very basic idea is, if I don't know anything about your organization, how do you expect me to give for your organization or volunteer for organization, right? So nonprofits need to ramp up their marketing strategy in multiple ways. I looked at your website, very powerful, right? You have your infographic video, which tells what you're doing in less than 1 minute, right? But not many nonprofits do that. Many of them do very powerful job, including some of the partners that GiveWell has highlighted for you, but they don't market themselves. And also the competition. There is so much competition, 1.5 million nonprofits in this country alone. So it's all segmentation, marketing, kind of learning the marketing principles from the for-profit world and apply to nonprofit causes, right? So in fact, we spend a lot of time in our courses on marketing the cause, right? So that is one thing. And the second is the wave of social media marketing, right? So that is once again, many nonprofits have not joined that bandwagon because your generation, the social media is everything. Later on, probably I'll talk a little bit about how you guys can help some nonprofits in the social media outreach as well. But overall, although they do amazing work, although they touch lives, they have this kind of impediment in marketing their causes. It is very important. Nonprofits, they don't need to give false information. They don't need to exaggerate what they do, but just tell people, tell the world what they do in terms of online presence, in terms of social media presence. Nowadays, the power of audio-visual information. Just brief video can tell the story of what they do and so on and so forth. So nonprofits need to be a little bit more savvy in marketing, and that's what GiveWell and other organizations do. There is another organization, what we call watchdog organization, and also nonprofits that take it upon themselves to improve the marketing part for other organizations, right? So we see growth in that area as well, but it's going to take a while for the nonprofit sector as a whole to adapt the marketing principles from the for-profit world to promote the causes they provide.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Reimão, do you have any thoughts on that? on?
I mean, I mostly agree with Professor Kumaran. Like, I think that in the end of the day, what matters is like, getting out more information, making sure people are informed really, because when people are looking to give, many times they'll be moved by like some dramatic events and much more, they'll respond much more to a dramatic event than to a well-researched event, right? And oftentimes giving is an emotional thing, right? So I cover this in my international humanitarian assistance class, where where I show that the financial response to a natural disaster is like a dramatic natural disaster, like an earthquake or hurricane, is much greater than for an ongoing crisis, such as, you know, extreme poverty, a famine, even if more people die in famines, right? And even for natural disaster, there's this rush of funding in the days and weeks after the event. And then soon there's like donor fatigue, both from individuals and countries and organizations, right? So I don't think that you can really win by competing around like which situation is most dramatic, who needs it the most, what is the biggest sob story, essentially, right? I don't think you can compete on that. I don't think it makes sense to compete on that. But I think that there is space still to provide a lot more questions are. You know, I think it's worth educating people on the evidence around different interventions. And at the same time, I think that it will still happen, that people will still donate to like the latest crisis, no matter how effective their donation is. And I think it's okay to donate to causes sometimes that might feel more personal to you, even if they're not the most effective. Like, you know, if you have your eyes open to that, then, you know, people will still donate to things that are more personal to them. But at the same time, you're right that a large share of people, they don't have a particular cause that they're personally connected to, and they are looking for this information. So they are looking for what is the most effective thing, or they would be open to knowing what the most effective causes are because they don't really have this personal connection to any event. And in that case, like, they just don't have the information. And I think Dr. Kumaran is right that like marketing and just getting the information out is essential.
And to be fair to some nonprofits, you know, they are passion driven, right? They are cost driven. In that process, they fail to notice the importance of transferring the information, telling the story in a powerful way. You know, it's so sad to see many nonprofits do not even have good mission statement. Mission statement is a 2-sentence statement that tells a story of what the organization is all about, right? So if they can't tell me in 2 sentences what they do, how do they expect me to give my hard-earned money? So, but they are so busy. That's why capacity building becomes very, very important. You know, do the right way and tell the story in a powerful way, so that brings that the goodwill I was talking about, right? In the form of giving, and that's what GiveWell does so well. There are several other organizations, online-based organizations, that promote the cause for other nonprofits that they cannot promote themselves, right? So when you look at the profile of GiveWell, you know, they highlight some organizations, they recommend some nonprofits around the world, very powerful, right? I mean, touching lives, changing lives every single day. But it takes GiveWell to tell the story of the organization, to recommend this organization, so people can give. But that's an area that we struggle constantly to teach them how to convey the information, starting with the basic and then expanding into other sophisticated realms like social media and audio, video, and other tools of marketing.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. And so our next question actually does go into addressing extreme poverty, and you both can take turns answering this one too. It's like, in each of your opinions, like, what are more effective ways to combat extreme poverty? I'm also going to drop a link into the chat so that everyone that is here can log on and say that they've been on, just for like our database, if you guys could do that. Do I need to repeat the question? I'm sorry if I wasn't, like, if I spoke low.
You asked about ways to combat extreme poverty?
Yes, like what are some more effective, like you said bed nets too, and like how that's something that like people don't really think about, but it is like in a way like an effective tool against poverty, like effect.
Well, I think that for extreme poverty in particular, right, I think we can talk about universal basic income, although the research is still out on that, but there is a lot of research on that going on. And then health, right? I focus on health here because when we talk about extreme poverty, then health is the main barrier, right? If you're frequently sick, you're going hungry, you have parasites, it's harder to work, it's harder to go to school, it's harder to grow, everything is harder, right? So I'm personally a huge believer in interventions on education or even interventions related to gender and programs that address gender inequality. But in the end of the day, when we talk about extreme poverty, we need to take a step back from that. Like if you're ailing from malaria or constantly sick or don't have enough vitamins or nutrients and your family members are vulnerable, all these other issues, as much as I care about them, they are secondary. When we talk about extreme poverty, it really comes down to health and to income, I'd say.
I don't want to interrupt you, but we are having technical difficulties right now, and we're about to get booted out of the Zoom. I'm trying to figure this out. I'm talking with Kenan right now. He's trying to upgrade it. Didn't anticipate this, but
I think we could log into the same link again in 2 minutes. Like when
yeah, let me try to create a new link real quick. So sorry about that. This shouldn't take me too long, but you can continue. I just wanted to let you all know what's going on. I'll send you guys all the link if we get booted. And it will also be on our Facebook for those of you who are tuning in.
Dr. Kumaran, go for it.
Do we continue now or we wait for this shift or?
There's a well, we can start, like we can